The stars shone brightly over the distant interstellar outpost, a place where beings from hundreds of worlds gathered to share their histories of battle, conquest, and survival. Ships of all shapes and sizes floated silently in the docking bays, their hulls gleaming under the artificial light of the outpost. The alien veterans who had survived countless wars moved through the corridors, each one carrying stories that were sometimes terrifying, sometimes heroic. Among them, a newcomer arrived. Kyle was tall with a lean, muscular build, his green-scaled skin glinting faintly in the hall's light. His eyes, amber and sharp, scanned the crowd with a mixture of calm observation and a hint of amusement. Even among these warriors, Kale's presence was different. He had fought in battles that many had only read about in ancient records. Yet today, he was here not to fight, but to tell stories. Stories of a species that the galaxy often underestimated: humans. As Kale moved into the grand hall, he noticed the other veterans watching him closely. Some whispered among themselves, casting doubtful glances toward the newcomer. Humans, they thought, were primitive. They had no advanced neural networks like the Zrithians, no psychic abilities like the Eltraxi, and no energy shields like the Corvins. Yet Kale's expression suggested he had witnessed something extraordinary, something the others had yet to understand. Kale took a seat at the center of the hall. Young aliens, some barely out of training, gathered around, their antennas twitching nervously. They had heard stories of humans before, but most had never seen one in action. Some thought the tales were exaggerations. Others were curious. Kyle's voice, when he finally spoke, was calm and steady, carrying across the hall like a gentle current. "I have seen humans in battle," Kale began, "and I will tell you why they are unlike any species you have faced. I will tell you stories that will make you question everything you know about warfare, courage, and strategy." A hush fell over the crowd. Even the older veterans, known for their skepticism, leaned in to listen. Kale smiled faintly, remembering his first encounter with human soldiers. It had been on a distant planet, one that few alien species even bothered to study. The humans had arrived unexpectedly, a small contingent of soldiers and explorers. Their equipment was basic, their ships smaller than any fleet the larger species had deployed. Yet what they lacked in technology, they made up for in spirit. Cal remembered the first skirmish vividly. The human squad had been surrounded by a superior alien force. Most species would have surrendered or retreated. Not the humans. They stood their ground, coordinating attacks with a precision that was almost instinctual. Their weapons were simple, yet effective. They adapted in real time, using the environment to their advantage. Kyle had watched, amazed, as humans created traps, feigned retreats, and turned the odds in their favor. They fight with a combination of intelligence, bravery, and unpredictability, Kale explained to the hall. When everyone else follows strategy manuals, humans improvise. And that improvisation, it is their greatest weapon, the young aliens murmured in disbelief. Some shook their heads. "It cannot be possible," one whispered. "They are so small and weak." Kyle chuckled softly. "You think strength is only in size or technology. You are wrong. Strength is in courage, in creativity, and in the refusal to give up. That is what humans have, in abundance." Kyle's eyes drifted to the distant ceiling, as if he could see the battlefields of memory. He began recounting the first story in detail, the human squad's arrival on the planet Yathara. The planet was harsh, with jagged cliffs, dense forests, and sudden storms that could tear ships apart. Kyle described how the humans landed in the most dangerous zone, where alien patrols expected no one to survive. They did not wait for backup. They did not request reinforcements. They moved forward with confidence, knowing that hesitation would cost them their lives, Kale said. He paused, letting the audience absorb his words. The young aliens leaned forward, their eyes wide. Kale continued, telling how humans encountered a patrol of alien drones, machines far faster and stronger than any human soldier. Yet the humans used the terrain cleverly, hiding in cliffs, using decoys, and even turning the drone's sensors against them. One human soldier, Kale remembered, had climbed a cliff under heavy fire to disable the enemy's control tower. It seemed reckless, almost suicidal, but it worked. The patrol was destroyed, and the humans moved deeper into enemy territory. "They fight differently than we do," Cal said. "Where other species rely on numbers, technology, or psychic power, humans rely on thought, intuition, and the bond between each other. They watch, learn, and act in ways that are impossible to predict." A young Zrithian raised a clawed hand. "But how can a species so fragile survive against us? Against fleets, psychic attacks, or plasma storms?" Kale's eyes glinted. "That is exactly why you underestimate them. Their fragility is a strength. They are flexible, they adapt. They find solutions where others see only obstacles. And most importantly, they never stop fighting. Even when the situation seems hopeless, they persist." The room was silent. Even the most hardened veterans were now listening with rapt attention. Kale smiled faintly, remembering how the humans' reputation had grown across the galaxy. Not because they were invincible, but because their victories often came from sheer ingenuity and courage. He moved to the next memory, the humans' first encounter with a massive alien warship. The ship was enormous, armed with energy cannons that could level mountains and bristling with defense drones. Most species would have fled at the sight. Not the humans. They launched small fighter ships, dodging attacks with movements no alien pilot could anticipate. The human ships were nimble, weaving between lasers and exploiting weak points in the enemy's armor. Kyle described in vivid detail how one human pilot risked everything to enter the enemy ship's core, planting an energy disruptor that caused the entire vessel to lose power. The aliens in the hall gasped. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and yet they succeeded, Kale said, because they think differently. They do not accept limits others impose upon them. And when they fail, they learn. They never stop improving. Kyle paused again, letting the magnitude of his words sink in. The young aliens were silent, some staring at him as if trying to imagine such a species existing in reality. Kyle smiled inwardly. This was exactly what he wanted. The disbelief, the curiosity, the awe. Then Kale spoke of something more personal. "It is not just their skill in battle that amazes me. It is their heart. Humans care for each other. They risk their own lives to protect their comrades. They act out of loyalty, not orders. They inspire those around them, even when facing impossible odds. That is something no technology can replicate." He told the story of a young human soldier who had shielded an injured alien ally from gunfire. The human had no obligation to help, yet he risked everything to save a life. That single act had turned the tide of the battle, giving the squad a chance to regroup and fight back. The audience was captivated. Many aliens had never considered that emotions could be a weapon, a strategy, or a force for victory. Kale had opened their eyes. By the end of the session, Kale leaned back and allowed the silence to settle. The veterans and young aliens alike were processing what they had heard. For most, it was impossible to reconcile their image of humans as weak and primitive with the stories of courage, intelligence, and ingenuity they had just witnessed. Kyle stood and walked toward the exit of the hall. Some of the younger aliens whispered among themselves, clearly excited. Others simply stared, unable to speak. Kale knew that by tomorrow, these stories would spread across the outpost, challenging assumptions and inspiring discussions about humanity. As he prepared to leave, a young alien approached him hesitantly. "Kale, do you really think humans can survive against any enemy?" Kale looked at the young one, his amber eyes steady. "Humans survive not because they are stronger than anyone else. They survive because they refuse to accept defeat. They fight for each other, for their home, and for what they believe is right. And that is a power no one can predict or control." With that, Kale left the hall, leaving behind whispers, wide eyes, and a spark of curiosity that would grow into respect and awe. The legend of humans had begun, not through fear, but through admiration and wonder. And in the hearts of those aliens who had heard him, the image of humanity had changed forever. Outside, the stars shone cold and distant, but Kale's mind was alive with memories of human soldiers, courageous, clever, and relentless. He smiled faintly. The galaxy would soon understand, and when it did, it would never underestimate humans again. The hall of the interstellar outpost still buzzed from Kale's first session. Word of his stories about humans had spread quickly. Young aliens gathered in small clusters, whispering excitedly, imagining the courage and ingenuity Kale had described. For many, the idea of a human standing firm against overwhelming odds was difficult to believe. Yet, Kale's amber eyes had shown truth in every word. The next day, Kale returned. The hall was fuller this time. Veterans from distant systems had come, drawn by curiosity, and young recruits waited with eager anticipation. Kyle knew today's stories had to be even more impressive. Today, he would talk about humans in full battle, their strategy, and their bravery in situations that would have broken other species. Kyle began by describing a human mission on the planet Veyron. The planet's terrain was harsh, vast deserts, jagged mountains, and storms that could rip ships apart. The humans had been sent to gather intelligence on an enemy fortress hidden deep in the mountains. Most alien species would have sent a massive fleet, relying on firepower and technology to overwhelm the enemy. The humans, however, sent a small team of about a dozen soldiers. Their numbers were tiny, Kale said, but their minds were vast. They understood that intelligence is more powerful than raw strength. They moved carefully, observing every ridge, every valley, every patrol. They learned patterns, studied weaknesses, and planned their moves with precision. The young aliens leaned in. Kale continued, describing the humans' first encounter with the enemy patrols. These patrols were numerous and heavily armed. Other species would have charged recklessly or waited for overwhelming reinforcements, not humans. They used shadows, terrain, and distractions. One human, Kale recalled, had created a noise diversion by throwing a small device into a canyon, drawing several patrols away while his team slipped past undetected. They think like chess players, but faster, Kale said. While others react, humans anticipate. While others calculate, humans improvise. And when things go wrong, they adapt instantly. Kale's eyes glinted as he spoke. He described how the human team encountered a massive energy turret guarding the fortress entrance. The turret could target anything within kilometers. Most species would have waited for air support or attempted a full-scale assault. Humans, however, found a narrow canyon above the turret. Using simple materials, they built a pulley system and rigged explosives, carefully lowering them to disable the turret. The operation was risky. A single misstep could have ended in disaster. Yet it worked perfectly. The fortress was now vulnerable. The hall was silent. Even the older veterans were captivated. Kale knew these details mattered. The audience needed to understand that humans' power was not in numbers or technology alone. It was in creativity and courage combined. Next, Kale told the story of the fortress infiltration itself. The human soldiers moved in under cover of darkness, using sensors, traps, and decoys to confuse the enemy. Kale described how one human had been discovered, surrounded by enemy guards. Instead of panicking, he signaled to his teammates and used the environment, a collapsing metal beam, to knock out the guards. He then guided his team past a series of deadly traps, all without triggering alarms. "Do you see?" Kyle asked. Other species might have panicked or been crushed by fear. Humans? They see obstacles as opportunities. Danger is not a signal to stop. It is a signal to think harder, move faster, and act smarter. He paused, letting the words sink in. A young Valorian whispered to her friend, "I cannot imagine being that calm when surrounded by enemies." Kyle smiled faintly. Humans are not fearless. They feel fear like everyone else. But they use it. Fear sharpens them. It focuses them. And when fear becomes courage, it is unstoppable. Kale then shifted to another remarkable story, the humans' first major victory against the Draxel fleet. The Draxel were known across galaxies as a ruthless species, their ships massive and their warriors formidable. Most species fled when faced with even a single Draxel cruiser. Yet humans had entered battle with only a handful of frigates. Every other species believed the humans would be destroyed instantly, Kyle said. But humans do not fight like others. They are not predictable. They did not charge blindly. They studied the enemy, learned its routines, and attacked at the moment the Draxel least expected. Cal described the battle in meticulous detail. The humans feinted attacks to confuse the Draxel, leading them into asteroid fields where their large ships became vulnerable. Human fighters darted between rocks and debris, striking critical points and retreating before the Draxel could respond. One human captain deliberately allowed a small cruiser to appear damaged, drawing the Draxel into a trap. Then, the humans struck with coordinated precision, destroying the enemy fleet's command ship and forcing the rest to retreat. The humans won, Kale said, not because they had the strongest weapons, but because they had the strongest minds, the strongest hearts, and the strongest will. A murmur ran through the hall. Many aliens had never heard of such tactics. They were used to overwhelming firepower, psychic attacks, or impenetrable shields. But humans? Humans used logic, intuition, and daring. They turned disadvantages into advantages. Kale then shared something more personal: how humans treated their allies. On the battlefield of Veyron, one human soldier had risked his life to rescue an injured alien warrior. The alien had been gravely wounded, and the humans could have left him to save themselves. But the human carried the alien over rough terrain, shielding him from attacks, and ensured he survived. That single act had strengthened the alliance between species, earning the humans respect far beyond the battlefield. The humans do not fight for glory or conquest alone, Kyle explained. They fight for each other, for life, and for the ideals they believe in. That loyalty, that compassion, becomes a weapon itself. It inspires allies and confuses enemies who expect humans to act selfishly. Humans are full of surprises. Kyle's stories shifted from battles to strategy. He spoke of human leaders who inspired their teams with words, courage, and calm thinking. Humans often worked in small units, each member understanding the strengths and weaknesses of the others. They trusted each other implicitly, and that trust allowed them to perform feats that larger, more technologically advanced forces could not achieve. One human squad of just 5 soldiers, Kyle said, defeated a garrison of 50 alien warriors using nothing but clever traps, timing, and teamwork. It was not magic. It was thought, observation, and perfect coordination. They turned every weakness into a weapon, every fear into action. Kyle noticed some of the younger aliens scribbling notes, trying to understand how humans could succeed against impossible odds. Some older veterans were shaking their heads in disbelief, struggling to reconcile what they had been taught about humans with Kale's stories. He then told of a human mission in space, outside any planet. A human ship had been caught in a storm of energy debris, surrounded by enemy fighters. Most species would have abandoned the ship or surrendered. But the human crew adapted. They used the debris as cover, navigating through it with incredible precision. The enemy, expecting a conventional approach, was repeatedly outmaneuvered. Humans turned what seemed like death into opportunity, striking when the enemy least expected and escaping with minimal losses. Kale's voice grew softer, almost reverent, as he described the courage he had witnessed. Humans do not accept limits imposed by fear, numbers, or environment. They see challenges as puzzles, and in every puzzle they find a solution. The hall was silent. The young aliens stared at him in awe. Even seasoned veterans had no words. Humans had been underestimated for centuries, and Kale had shown them why that was a mistake. Finally, Kale concluded the session with a reflection on human creativity. You may think their weapons are simple, their ships small, and their numbers weak, but humans are inventors in the middle of chaos. They adapt faster than any species I have ever known. They turn ordinary materials into extraordinary solutions. A single human can change the outcome of a battle not by power, but by thinking differently. That is their greatest strength. The young aliens were inspired. The older veterans nodded slowly, some in quiet admiration. Kyle had changed how they viewed humans. No longer were humans primitive or weak. They were unpredictable, courageous, and brilliant. They were warriors in a league of their own. As Kale left the hall, whispers of admiration followed him. Some young aliens discussed joining human forces for training or alliances. Others simply stared at the stars, imagining the courage it must take to be human. Kyle smiled faintly, knowing that the legend of humans was spreading, one story at a time. Outside, the stars shone cold and silent, but Kale's mind was alive with memories of courage, loyalty, and brilliance. Humans had faced impossible odds, yet survived and triumphed. And in every corner of the galaxy, Kale knew, the story of humanity's strength was beginning to inspire others. The tale of human warfare was not just about battles, it was about heart, mind, and spirit. And for those who listened, it was a lesson that would not be forgotten. The interstellar hall was alive with anticipation once again. Word had spread quickly about Kale's stories of humans, how they defied expectations, outsmarted enemies, and survived impossible odds. This time, the audience was larger than ever. Young aliens, veterans, and scholars from multiple systems gathered to witness the next chapter in the tale of humanity. Kale knew today's stories had to go deeper, not just showing humans as warriors, but as beings whose heart and morality could change the course of battles. Kale began with a story from a world called Larethis, a jungle planet thick with enormous trees and deadly wildlife. Human forces had been sent there to assist alien allies in a war against the Xylar, a species known for their tactical ruthlessness. The humans arrived in small squads, lightly armed, while the Xylar forces were numerous and heavily equipped. Most species would have relied on overwhelming force. Humans did something unexpected. They listened first, observed second, and acted third. They moved quietly, learning the ways of the jungle and the patterns of their enemies, Kale explained. They understood the land, the wildlife, and even the weather. They used every element around them as part of their plan. The humans' first engagement was with a patrol of Xylar warriors. Outnumbered 5-1, the humans did not panic. They created decoys and traps, using natural camouflage and simple mechanical devices to mislead the enemy. Kyle described one human who lured a patrol into a pit, camouflaged with branches and leaves. Another distracted the remaining Xylar with a controlled fire in the undergrowth, creating confusion and fear. Within minutes, the humans had neutralized the patrol without anyone in their team being harmed. Kale's audience was amazed. The young aliens could hardly imagine such precision under pressure. They whispered among themselves, astonished that humans could combine strategy, bravery, and careful planning so seamlessly. Kale continued, telling a story that would become legendary in the minds of those listening. During the Larethis campaign, a human squad discovered a group of alien civilians trapped behind enemy lines. The humans faced a choice: complete their military mission or risk their lives to save the civilians. Without hesitation, they chose the civilians. They devised a plan, using stealth and teamwork to sneak past the Xylar. At one point, a human soldier carried a young alien child through a narrow canyon while under enemy fire. Another soldier distracted the Xylar by creating false signals that suggested the humans were retreating. It was bravery, Kale said, his voice low, but also wisdom. They understood that protecting life was more important than following orders blindly. And their courage inspired those around them, both humans and aliens alike. Kale paused, letting the audience absorb the story. The young aliens were silent, imagining the courage it must take to risk one's life for another. Even the veterans nodded slowly, realizing that human bravery was not just about battle, but about compassion and morality. He moved to another remarkable tale, the defense of a space station orbiting the planet Orcs. The station was under attack by a technologically superior alien fleet. Most species would have evacuated or surrendered. The humans, however, organized a defense using limited resources. They coordinated small fighter teams, used the station's structure for cover, and even repurposed old equipment as weapons. Kale described a human officer who, noticing a critical section of the station was about to be destroyed, manually rerouted the power and repaired shields while under fire. Another human engineer created improvised energy barriers to protect vulnerable sections. The humans' resourcefulness turned the tide, allowing reinforcements to arrive and forcing the enemy fleet to retreat. The humans adapt, Kale said. When they lack power, they invent it. When they face death, they endure. When hope seems lost, They create hope. That is the essence of their strength. The hall was captivated. Even the skeptics were leaning forward, listening intently. Kale knew this was the moment where humans' unseen strengths, their ingenuity, empathy, and persistence, would be understood. Kale then shifted to a story of leadership under pressure. On the planet Serath, a human squad was trapped on a mountain cliff during a storm. Alien species nearby had abandoned hope, expecting all humans to perish. But the human leader, a seasoned officer, kept calm. He coordinated every move, assigning roles based on each soldier's strengths. Some built shelters, some scouted paths, and some created signals to communicate with reinforcements. Despite the harsh weather and enemy presence, the humans survived the storm and turned the situation into a strategic advantage, ambushing an enemy patrol the following day. They do not crumble under pressure, Kale said. They do not panic. Humans focus on solutions, not problems. That focus, combined with courage, makes them unstoppable, even when facing what seems impossible. Kale noticed some of the younger aliens taking careful notes. One whispered to a friend, "Their minds and hearts are as powerful as their weapons." Kale nodded to himself, knowing that was the lesson. Humans were not just soldiers, but thinkers, inventors, and guardians. Their morality often gave them an advantage that other species could not understand. They fought with honor, but also with empathy, using both as tools in battle. He then shared a story of a human medic squad on the planet Thaler, a battlefield filled with debris and enemy traps. Human medics moved into dangerous zones to rescue wounded soldiers, both human and alien, while under continuous fire. One medic, Kale recalled, had shielded a group of injured aliens with her body while guiding them to safety. Another human engineer used fragments of wreckage to create temporary shelters for the wounded. These acts are not required by orders or strategy, Kale said. They do them because it is right, and rightness, in the chaos of war, is a strength no one can predict. Kale noticed some veterans exchanging glances. Even species that valued efficiency and logic had to respect the human's blend of heart and strategy. He then told a story of improvisation during space combat. A human ship had been surrounded by enemy drones, their weapons far superior. The human crew used the debris from destroyed ships, maneuvered between asteroids, and set up traps that destroyed the drones one by one. Kyle described the scene vividly. The rapid calculations, the daring maneuvers, the way each human used their creativity and courage to survive. Their weapons and ships may be smaller, Kale said, but their minds are limitless. They see possibilities no one else notices. They turn every disadvantage into an opportunity, and every threat into a challenge to overcome. Kale then shared a quieter story, one of humans interacting with other species outside of battle. During a campaign on the jungle world, Vetra, human soldiers helped local communities rebuild after attacks. They shared knowledge, repaired structures, and trained locals in defense techniques. This act of kindness strengthened alliances and created trust, showing that humans understood that winning wars was not just about destruction, it was about protection and collaboration. The humans' strength is in their unpredictability, Kale said. Not just in battle, but in everything they do. They combine courage, intelligence, creativity, and morality. That combination is something no enemy can fully anticipate. He noticed the younger aliens leaning closer, eyes wide, as if they could almost see the humans moving through forests, deserts, and space with purpose and skill. Even the veterans were paying attention, recognizing that human warfare was unique, not just for its tactics, but for its spirit. Kale concluded the session with a reflection. Humans fight differently because they care differently. They do not seek glory or domination. They fight for life, for justice, and for their companions. They turn fear into action, obstacles into opportunities, and morality into strategy. That is why they survive when others fail, why they triumph when others expect them to fall. The hall was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, the murmurs began. Young aliens whispered about bravery, teamwork, and strategy. Veterans nodded in quiet respect. Scholars discussed how human methods could be studied and learned. Kale had done more than tell stories. He had reshaped the galaxy's understanding of humanity. As he left the hall, Kale felt a sense of satisfaction. Humans were no longer underestimated in the minds of those who had listened. They were admired, respected, and even feared for their courage, their intellect, and their heart. Outside, the stars gleamed silently, but Kale's thoughts were alive with memories of humans. They were warriors, unlike any other species, not because of their size or technology, but because of their spirit, their heart, and their unyielding will. And in the hearts of those who had listened, a new story was being written. The story of humanity, the species that fought with courage, thought with brilliance, and loved with strength. The hall of the interstellar outpost was packed. Kyle returned for the final session, and this time, the anticipation was electric. Word of the humans' bravery, intelligence, and compassion had spread throughout the galaxy. Young aliens, seasoned veterans, and scholars had gathered to witness the final part of the tale. Everyone was eager to understand why humans were considered a force unlike any other. Kale's amber eyes swept the crowd. He knew today's stories had to capture something deeper, something that showed not only human skill in battle, but their lasting impact on the galaxy. He began with a tale from a distant system where humans had faced their greatest challenge yet, a coalition of alien empires intent on conquering a newly discovered human settlement. The humans were outnumbered, Kale said, his voice calm yet intense. They had fewer ships, fewer soldiers, and fewer resources than any of their enemies. Most species would have surrendered, or at best, delayed the inevitable. Humans? They refused to accept defeat. They fought with strategy, courage, and ingenuity. Kyle described how the humans had used the terrain of a small asteroid belt to their advantage. They created ambush points, hid their smaller ships among massive rocks, and used gravity fields to confuse enemy sensors. The aliens in the hall leaned forward, eyes wide, imagining the humans darting between the asteroids like shadows, striking enemies, and disappearing before a counterattack could even begin. One human captain, Kale said, noticed a flaw in the enemy's formation. Instead of attacking head-on, he led his fleet through a narrow pass, risking everything. But it worked. The enemy was trapped, confused, and vulnerable. The humans turned what seemed like certain defeat into victory. The young aliens whispered among themselves. Kale smiled faintly. He knew this was only part of the story. The humans' victories were not measured by destruction alone. They were measured by wisdom, courage, and the lives they protected. Kyle continued, recounting how humans had built alliances across species. During the same campaign, humans rescued civilians from multiple worlds, shared their limited supplies, and trained local forces in tactics. These actions earned loyalty and trust that no weapon could buy. Aliens who had once been neutral joined the humans' side, inspired by their courage and integrity. The humans fight not just for themselves, Kale said. They fight for others. And that inspires loyalty stronger than any technology or weapon. Next, Kale told a story from a battlefield on the icy world of Navara. A human squad had been tasked with holding a critical outpost against a relentless enemy. The temperature was extreme, their equipment strained, and their numbers too small. Most species would have retreated or frozen in place. Humans. They built improvised shelters, repurposed damaged weapons, and coordinated shifts to conserve energy while remaining vigilant. Kale described in detail how one human soldier had used knowledge of the ice storms to predict enemy movements, guiding his team to ambush positions. Another had created traps using frozen debris, forcing enemy units into tight channels where humans could strike efficiently. By the time reinforcements arrived, the humans had held the outpost for days, their courage and planning saving countless lives. They survive, Kale said, because they think, adapt, and never give up, and they protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is the heart of humanity. Kale then moved to stories that highlighted human innovation under pressure. On a desert planet called Korath, humans had been stranded after a failed drop. Enemy patrols hunted them relentlessly. With no resources, the humans scavenged the land, creating tools, weapons, and shelter from what others would consider useless debris. They made water from scarce moisture, created signals to mislead the enemy, and even found ways to transport supplies using desert creatures native to the planet. They survive because they invent, Kyle said. They see solutions where others see only problems. And when their creativity combines with courage, nothing can stop them. The aliens in the hall were silent, many staring in awe. Humans' power was not only in their bravery or skill, it was in their mind, heart, and will. Kyle shifted to a story that showed human morality in action. On the planet Solara, humans had been part of a coalition to defend a city from an enemy siege. Many alien leaders suggested sacrificing civilians to save resources or reduce risk. The humans refused. They designed strategies that protected everyone, using decoys, stealth, and clever planning to save both soldiers and civilians. One human officer personally rescued a group of injured aliens from a collapsed building while under enemy fire. Another human squad led children and elders to safety, moving them through underground passages that no one else dared to enter. Their compassion became a tactical advantage. The enemy, expecting humans to be ruthless, was confused by their actions. The humans show, Kale explained, that morality can be strength. Courage alone is impressive, but courage combined with heart, this is unstoppable. It inspires allies and unsettles enemies. That is why humans are different. Kyle paused and looked around the hall. He saw amazement in the eyes of young recruits, respect in the faces of seasoned veterans, and curiosity among scholars who had never considered morality as part of strategy. This was the lesson Kale had come to teach. Humans' greatest victories came not only from skill, but from their values, empathy, and teamwork. He then shared stories of human diplomacy, which often followed battles. After victories, humans did not impose control over alien worlds. Instead, they offered cooperation, shared knowledge, and helped rebuild what was destroyed. Their reputation grew not through fear, but through respect. Entire civilizations joined alliances with humans, inspired by their actions both on and off the battlefield. The humans' impact, Kale said, is more than victory in war. It is shaping alliances, building trust, and inspiring hope. That is their legacy. The galaxy remembers not just what they destroy, but what they protect and build. Kale then moved to the final story, one that had become personal for him. It was the story of a massive interstellar battle, where humans faced a coalition of enemy forces on multiple fronts. Most species would have considered surrender inevitable. The humans, however, fought with strategy, courage, and unity. Kale described how humans coordinated thousands of units across different planets, communicating in ways that alien technology could barely track. They anticipated enemy moves, set traps, and improvised in real time when plans failed. Human leaders worked side by side with young soldiers, demonstrating courage, calm thinking, and empathy. During this battle, Kale witnessed humans saving not only their allies but even former enemies trapped in dangerous zones. They risked their lives repeatedly to protect those who could not fight. By the end of the battle, humans had not only survived, they had reshaped the conflict entirely, winning the strategic advantage and creating a lasting peace in the region. They do not fight for revenge, Kale said. They fight for survival, for justice, and for the protection of life. And because of that, their victories are remembered long after the battle ends. That is the essence of human legacy. The audience was silent. The weight of Kale's words settled over them. Humans were no longer a species to underestimate. They were a force shaped by courage, intelligence, and compassion. A species that changed the galaxy not through fear, but through heart and mind. Kale concluded this session with reflection. When you study humans, you learn that victory is not only about weapons, numbers, or technology. It is about will, heart, and unity. It is about protecting others, adapting to challenges, and refusing to accept limits. Humans have reshaped every battlefield they touch, not because they are the strongest physically, but because they are relentless, ingenious, and morally strong. That is why the galaxy respects them. That is why we admire them. And that is why we will never forget them. He stepped back, letting the silence linger. The young aliens were inspired, the veterans thoughtful, and the scholars scribbling notes furiously. Kale had not just told stories of war, he had shown the human spirit in all its brilliance. As Kale left the hall, the murmurs followed him. Discussions began about studying humans more closely, learning their tactics, and understanding how morality and courage could combine to create unstoppable force. Even species that had once dismissed humans as primitive now sought alliances and friendship. Kyle smiled faintly. He knew the human story had reached a new level. It was now legend. Outside, the stars stretched across the sky like a silent witness. Kyle looked upward, thinking of the humans he had fought alongside, their courage, their humor, their creativity, and their compassion. They were not just warriors, they were symbols of hope and strength. And in the hearts of every alien who had heard his stories, a spark had been lit. They would carry it forward, inspired by the human spirit, reminded that true strength was more than power. It was heart, mind, and the refusal to give up. Kale whispered softly to himself, knowing the truth. Humans are extraordinary, and the galaxy is only beginning to understand what that means. The hall emptied slowly, but the stories remained. Young recruits spoke of humans in awe. Veterans nodded in respect. Scholars debated and discussed strategies inspired by human ingenuity. And Kale walked away quietly, knowing that his mission was complete. Humanity had left its mark, and the galaxy would never see warfare, strategy, or courage the same way again. For the humans were not just soldiers. They were thinkers, heroes, inventors, and guardians. They were a species that inspired hope, challenged assumptions, and proved that the human spirit could triumph against any odds. The story of humans would continue, through memory, through legend, and through every being who had witnessed their courage. Kale knew that the galaxy would never forget them, and with that thought, he stepped into the corridor, leaving behind a hall filled with admiration, respect, and wonder, the legacy of humanity told through the eyes of an alien veteran.